So, Juliana, you live out in Seattle. Tell us about the wildfires that are happening out on the West Coast.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of you listening have probably seen those kind of what I assume will become iconic photos of this incident out of Oregon. The entire sky and like landscape just completely lit up orange, like super low visibility just because of the dust and everything else, and it kind of has been compared to what people would assume life would be like on Mars.
Yeah.
And although that's kind of a funny little joke, like this is not a laughing matter in any sense whatsoever. I live in Seattle, and even today and yesterday, we've had like air quality advisories. Even me just driving up the highway, and like generally August in Seattle is like no clouds. The sky is bright blue. There's absolutely like nothing in the way, and like even just I want to say like half a mile to a mile in front of me starts to get hazy, which is kind of crazy, which as someone who's from the East Coast now living on the West Coast, that's not something I've ever been used to.
No, definitely not. I mean, I've lived on the East Coast my whole life, and I can't even imagine waking up and looking in the sky and it's just a hazy, yellowish, even orange. I mean, you in Seattle don't even see it as bad as it is in, I think, Salem, Oregon, where it's literally pitch orange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. No, it's really not that bad in Seattle just because most of the fires are in the eastern part of the state and Seattle is very much west. But like still, like it's still, we're getting it from Oregon, we're getting it from Eastern Washington, maybe even some more from NorCal, just kind of all floating up, and like where the way that like Puget Sound works, everything just kind of starts to swirl in the Puget Sound and just kind of blanket the area.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, he put out an interesting tweet today with a little statistics about the fires in California. So in 2019, California had 4,927 fires and 118,000 acres were burned. Sounds like a lot, right? But when we look at California in 2020, 2020 is not even over yet. They've had 7,606 fires and 2.3 million acres burned. So that's about 20 times more acres burned this year than last year, and this year's not even over.
And I was going to say, I believe there's about another month left of like the so-called fire season. And since you kind of shared what that governor said, I want to share Jay Inslee, who's the governor of Washington, said that I'm not sure which day it was, but whatever day that the most of the damage was done, it was more damage in one day than in a typical year for Washington state. There's more acres burned in that one day than also 12 of the last fire seasons in Washington, which is like just like think about those numbers. Like I know when you're listening and you're just hearing someone like spit out some stats to you, just like think about it.
Yeah,
one day compared to 12 of the last entire fire season, which I believe are like 40 to 90 days long in the state.
That really is crazy. Wow.
It's yeah.
And a little funny, a funny kind of side note, funny, not funny. More houses have been burnt down in the fires in California than all of the Black Lives Matter, uprisings and riots combined. But, the right-wingers aren't talking at all about the fires yet.
Right. And also, I want to call out the media, like the media as a whole in general, because not just like left-wing, right-wing, whatever. I live in Washington State, and I was unaware. And I like follow news I go trending Twitter, trending in Washington, like all of those things. And I didn't even know that there was fires in Washington going on. I just assumed that it was all coming up from Oregon and California. Like, I don't know if that's just me being like dumb and not looking at the right things, but like, I don't know how I did not know that Eastern Washington was also on fire. And I feel like, I don't know if it's just because the media doesn't like to talk about climate change, or there's just more important political things going on, and like Trump things get more clicks and stuff like that. But like, again, I live here, and I was unaware that there were fires going on in my state.
It definitely fits a broader trend just in general of the media under-reporting on the climate problem. I mean, I remember in a lot of the presidential primary debates, they didn't ask one question about climate change, which is like one of the most important issues politically facing the entire world. It's not even political, facing all of life on Earth.
Yeah.
And they don't even ask one question in some of these debates. And, you live in Washington and you don't hear about a major, natural disaster impacting your state. I mean, this is the issue. I mean, climate change is going to be, I think I've seen somebody tweet about it. in a really interesting way that this is going to be the best year going forward. You know what I mean? Like, this year sounds really bad to us right now in hindsight, looking back at what we've experienced so far. But as years go on, the toll that we're seeing in 2020 will be nothing compared to the damage that we're going to see in 2025, 2030, and every year going forward as the crisis gets worse.
Yeah. And I feel like some people are kind of like, they don't put two and two together. It's just like, oh, it's a particularly dry season. I wouldn't say people, but I would say people who are, I guess, climate change deniers don't understand how the two are connected. Like, fires happen when shit is dry and hot. Climate change makes things drier and hotter. Like, it's just, and there's like, and for people who like deny that climate change exists, you can go ahead, have your opinion on whether humans contribute to it or not, ignore the science, fine, whatever. But like, these things are still happening, and that means we still need to do something about it. Like, Death Valley in California recorded its hottest temperature since 1913. It was 130 degrees. And in the Arctic Circle, I believe it was a small town in Siberia, hit like 100 degrees in the Arctic Circle. Like, if you don't see a problem with that, like, I don't know. Like,
and the thing is, even if, let's just go with their argument, which is totally ridiculous, but let's just go with their argument, that it has nothing to do with carbon emissions. So let's say we go through all of this process. The UN, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 2018, they said, quote, staying at or below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the Paris Climate Agreement goal, requires slashing global greenhouse gas emissions 45% below 2010 levels by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050. So let's just go with the climate deniers argument. We cut emissions all the way to net zero by 2050, and it doesn't stop climate change from continuing. I mean, but fossil fuel emissions are bad for air quality. Air pollution causes public health problems. Extracting these resources from the ground causes all sorts of environmental problems. So even if we're wrong about the emissions thing, which all scientists say we're not, but even if we were, there would still be tons of benefits to doing this anyway, to cutting emissions anyway, just in case.
Right. And it's like, it's not, I don't know. I said this to you earlier before we started recording, but it's like, let's say you want to build a house on a fault line, and even though whatever science, let's say 1,000% there's going to be a massive earthquake where you live in 3 years. And you go, oh, well, that's just like nature. It just happens naturally. Like, would you still choose to live there? Would you not prepare to save yourself from all of that damage that is going to happen? Or that could potentially happen? Like, what's the worst case scenario if you prepare for something and then it doesn't happen? Oh, well, good for you. You prepared just in case. Like, I don't get the resistance to, I guess, like, progressing forward with science. Like, it's just science. Like,
And so I'll connect this a little bit now to, like, the politics of it. And so we'll go into the presidential politics of it for a little bit, and then I'll kind of connect it to the Green New Deal and other issues. But, so Trump, I mean, we don't even have to go into it very much. He called climate change a hoax made by the Chinese. He wants to increase carbon emissions. He wants to use clean coal, he says, which is not clean at all. But so that's where he is. He is completely anti-environment in every single way without fail. And Joe Biden is a little better in the sense that at least he wants to rejoin the Paris Agreement that Trump pulled us out of. We're the only country in the world not part of the Paris Agreement. Even North Korea and
crazy.
Syria and other countries are in the Paris Agreement. But so at least Joe...
I don't know why that wasn't a bigger deal when that happened. Like, that was crazy.
I mean, I just think it has to do in general with the downplaying of the climate issue by the media. But, so he wants to rejoin the Paris Agreement, which is good. So the goal of the Paris Agreement is to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. But the only problem that some people have is that, Joe Biden talks a good talk, but will he walk the walk? And so he does have a lot of fossil fuel lobbyists who are kind of involved in this campaign. He gets campaign donations from fossil fuel companies. And so on one hand, you might say, well, yeah, but maybe those companies are changing. And, maybe to a certain degree it could be true. But it also, I think, has to do with, Joe Biden has publicly said that he won't stop fracking at all, hydraulic fracking, which is how they get natural gas. So just a little context on that. Natural gas, it burns less emissions than oil or than coal. And so that's why they're trying to transition us more and more onto natural gas. The only problem is to actually get it out of the ground. They have to inject a bunch of water into the ground, which causes the earth to fracture. That's why it's called fracking. And it often leads to pollution into waterways, pollution into drinking water sometimes, and earthquakes happen a lot near these fracking rigs. And so while it's good that Joe Biden wants to rejoin the Paris Agreement and says he wants to reach net zero by 2050, people worry that if you keep doing fracking and if he doesn't actually put into place any concrete plans to actually get us to net zero by 2050, because, Obama joined the Paris Climate Agreement when he was president, but there were no mechanisms put in place to make sure that we actually fulfill our obligations for the climate agreement. So it'll be interesting to see if Joe Biden actually puts forward concrete plans to actually reach that net zero instead of just talking about it.
Right, and I just want to add one little thing about fracking. The water that they use for fracking is either majority or I believe completely all fresh water. So I don't feel like people understand that we are actually our freshwater supply is diminishing just as time goes on, as there's more people, as more things become polluted. It's a huge use. What is this? According to ecowatch.com, I'm not gonna lie, don't know how credible. 5 million gallons of fresh water used to frack just one well. That's I am a vegetarian for a lot of reasons. And specifically one of them is how much fresh water is used for the meat industry and things like that. Yeah. It's just don't. It's these things that seem so simple and straightforward to me in my brain. It's yes, let's use a diminishing resource to further harm the earth. Yep, makes total sense. What?
I mean, the problem is they just think of it in the short term of our top priority is to cut carbon emissions. Natural gas cuts carbon emissions. Thus, the phrase they use for natural gas is they call it a transition fuel. So they all admit that they don't want to do this long term because it's really bad for the environment. But if we want to cut emissions in time, this is what we need to do. Now, a lot of people push back on that by saying, well, if you take away subsidies away from fossil fuel companies and put it towards green energy, renewable energy, you don't need to use natural gas as a transition fuel. So a lot of people worry that the reason why fossil fuel interests are relatively friendly to Biden is because he's letting them continue fracking, despite all of the evidence about how bad it is still. And to kind of connect one last thing before we wrap the segment up. So the Green New Deal. A lot of people have concerns, a lot of moderates have concerns about the Green New Deal because, we need to cut carbon emissions. Why are you throwing in things about a job guarantee? Why are you throwing in things about racism into a bill that's supposed to be just an environmental bill? And, on face value, I can understand why they feel that way. Why are we throwing all these things into one bill? But the counter argument that you hear from people like AOC, and I find it really convincing, is that, if we only cut carbon emissions, but we don't focus on the human impact that we're going to see from environmental problems, I mean, you're only solving a small fraction of the problem because it's people of color who are going to face the problems of climate change first and worst. So they're going to get, and in general, poverty, it typically tends to be people of color who face poverty more than other people. And it's people who live in poverty who will face these problems the worst because, if your house burns down in California and you're too poor to afford another one, you're screwed. If you're an island nation in the Pacific and the waters raise and your island disappears, you're a climate refugee. Where are you going to go to? And so the whole idea with actually guaranteeing people a job, it'd be in green energy because that's where we're moving towards. And especially it would focus on getting coal workers and other fossil fuel workers into those industries. But so if we can give people a job and pull people out of poverty and focus on what we're going to do with climate refugees now, if we can start talking about those issues now, we won't be cleaning up the mess after the fact later, which is unfortunately because Biden hasn't publicly come out in support of the Green New Deal. His plan's good with carbon emissions, but it's missing those other elements.
Yeah, I think people really need to focus on that climate change doesn't only, like, yes, obviously it affects the earth. And I feel like some people don't put together, like, oh yeah, I live on earth. Like, when it's not directly affecting you, it's not something that I guess a lot of people pay attention to. At least in the States, I know that's a big problem that we face. Just people don't care about things that don't directly affect them. But it's like, if we wait any longer, it'll be too late. And something I just wanted to add, if any of you are interested in learning a little bit more about how climate change affects wildfires and things like that, there was a great TED Talk on YouTube that I watched by Paul Hasberg, who is a scientist. So if you want to learn more about that, I encourage you to check that out.
And I will check it out with everybody else.
Alrighty, that is all we have for you guys today. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you give it a like. And if you want to hear more from us, make sure you subscribe to our channel. You can follow us on our other socials by liking us on Facebook at Back Pocket Report, following us on Instagram at Back Pocket Report, and also on Twitter at BPR News Pod.
Next time you're looking for news, don't forget to check your back pocket.